not surprisingly, and he also met for the first time, at least as running mates, his running mate, the vice presidential nominee, that is JD Vance. And he selected JD Vance yesterday, which was a big announcement. JD Vance from Ohio, U.S. Senator. Very young as political candidates go for the highest office in the land and the second highest office in the land. But that may have been the point, to inject some youth into an election that has essentially two octogenarians running against each other, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. A lot of people have been talking about the lack of youth at the top and second positions in the ticket, and J.D. Vance certainly gives that to Donald Trump. J.D. Vance has a former roommate, I should say, from Yale Law School, and that is Georgia Senator Josh McLaurin from the North Fulton suburbs. He obviously is a Democrat, and J.D. Vance is a Republican, and he makes no mistake saying that. Senator McLaurin says he never really saw eye to eye with his roommate, but they kept in touch, and in 2016 had shared some messages where, this is back when J.D. Vance was fervently anti-Trump. He even called himself a never-Trumper back then and had said some very negative things about Donald Trump. He has gone all in on Donald Trump and has been one of his biggest supporters. Donald Trump endorsed him in 2022 for the U.S. Senate seat that he won, first political office that J.D. Vance has held. So he is, young, as they say in politics. When you're in your 30s and national politics, that's pretty young. But again, that may indeed have been the point. We now have Secretary of State Raffensperger, who is right now addressing election issues. Let's dip in and see if we can hear what the Secretary of State in Georgia is saying.
County, even the county surveyor, to governors, presidents, state reps, and state senators. We vote on sales taxes and bonds. We vote to create cities like we did in North Fulton with the city of Johns Creek, where I served from 2012 to 2014. Americans make choices when they vote. Yes or no on this sales tax, yes or no on this candidate, and other measures that they get to vote on. We think that's really important, and that's really what defines America. No other country in the world creates their society and has created their society the way America did. And that's why I believe that America, democracy, isn't on the ballot. It's really, we get to express ourselves at the ballot itself. It's also why I believe we should do everything we can to ensure that only Americans vote in our elections. It's currently state law in Georgia that only American citizens vote in our elections. It's also federal law that non-citizens cannot vote in federal elections. But I would prefer an amendment to the state constitution, so it's actually enshrined that only American citizens would be voting in our elections. The reason I feel that way, first of all, it's has overwhelming support by all Georgians, majorities in both political parties. They believe that only Americans should vote. But it's also because groups like the Coalition for the People's Agenda keep on taking us to court to try and force us to stop us from verifying citizenship before we put people on the voter rolls. We keep winning in court, but it doesn't stop them from trying. An amendment to the state constitution, which would carry more weight than the state law than the groups on the left would like to overturn. I'm the first Secretary of State to do an audit of our voter rolls to make sure that we had only American citizens on our voter rolls. And what we found was about 1,600 instances where non-citizens had attempted to register. People say, well, that's just a small faction. Why are you worrying about that? I guess some people would like to have it be a big problem before they do something about it. As an engineer, I think we need to head things off at the source and make sure that only Americans on our voter rolls, only American citizens are voting. Getting back to the Bet the Vote, the beautiful thing about this organization is that we understand veterans are the most trusted organization in America, our military forces. What they've done is they've actually set aside the politics because they know people come from all over the country, all 50 states and our territories, coming to serve together. And they build them into a cohesive, unified fighting force to protect us, to defend us. We have cemeteries throughout the world where people have done this, Normandy, and actually even in Florence, Italy, from the Italian campaign of World War II. And then most recently in our wars in the Middle East. So we have always gone around the state encouraging people to be poll workers. Anyone can do the process. In fact, people have questions about the process. We would highly recommend that they become a poll worker. And they see all the checks, other checks.
All right, so that was Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. He's addressing issues there, specifically about. Can we bring that volume down a little bit on the? Okay, there we go. Sorry, folks. Just hearing other audio in my ear there, hard to concentrate. So that was Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, and he was specifically addressing the issue of foreigners voting, essentially people who are not citizens of the United States, people in the country illegally, and was saying that he was making efforts to try to stop that. He even said that his office has been sued by groups who are trying to prevent, or at least to find out some information about people who are here illegally trying to vote. We've done investigative reporting on this. The numbers are generally low. You heard Brad Raffensperger say there that there have been 1,600 attempts, according to their audit, of people to vote or to register to vote. It's important to point out that he specifically said attempts. It would be interesting to see how successful those 1,600 attempts were, because it's to register to vote, you have to be a citizen of the United States. It's already enshrined in law. He was talking about strengthening that with additional laws, and also being more aggressive in trying to police people voting illegally. It has been somewhat of a talking point on the right that illegals, people who are in the country illegally, it's important to point out, to clarify that statement, are voting in these elections, and there's actually very little evidence of that occurring at all. But what Brad Raffensperger is doing is saying, hey, we want to strengthen that to make sure there's absolutely no chance of that happening, because a vote by someone who's not a citizen would obviously dilute a vote for people who are citizens. We do have, looks like we have Doug Reardon standing by live right now. Doug, can you hear me? Just give me a little nod. And yeah, he hears me. Great.
Yeah.
All right, Doug Reardon is live right now at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Doug, you had quite a bit of a challenge getting in there, as I remember from 2016 at both conventions. There's quite a bit of security, but after an assassination attempt on the former president, it was quite a bit of a challenge, I imagine, to get inside the arena today.
Yeah, and it was still very hectic out there today, a little less than yesterday, I would say. I think everyone's kind of got their bearings now since they've been here on the ground, some people for days now. But these checkpoints are still very active. And like we said, even though Secret Service, said that they would not be beefing up security or changing their plans, certainly there is a very robust presence of security here, lots of different agencies. And so getting in today, a little easier than yesterday, but it is still very much active, that perimeter. But we are here a little earlier than yesterday, too. And as you can see behind me, the convention hall is very empty. They're still just setting up for the day 2 of this convention. And we expect to have a lot of activity today, although we had a lot more yesterday than I think anyone anticipated. So we have a couple speakers tonight. Lara Trump is going to be speaking tonight. We also anticipate some of these events around the stadium are going to be really active today. Some of the more convention aspects of this, seminars and meetings of delegations and things of that nature. So very active day here at day 2 already off the bat.
All right, sorry about that, Doug. We're having a little bit of an audio problem here, again, trying to hear you. So while everyone else can hear what you're saying, I can't. But what I can do is ask questions that you may or may not have already answered, and I apologize for that. But thanks for being a trooper out there, because we know you're working around the clock covering this convention. Obviously we're looking at Nikki Haley tonight taking the stage behind you. That is a huge development. I don't think anybody saw that coming. She wasn't even invited to the convention before all of this. And now we know Nikki Haley will be speaking, and in a primetime slot. She was a major challenge to Donald Trump. She had become, even though she was part of his first administration as ambassador to the UN, she had become sort of a never-Trumper and had said she was the alternative. Now she's going to be speaking at the convention. Is this a sign of a new unified Republican Party, in your view?
Absolutely, no question about it, because that relationship was incredibly adversarial in the primary. And keep in mind, you had a lot of people. I think in Georgia, the number was just shy of 100,000 voters that cast ballots for Nikki Haley. And so, there are a lot of people out there, voters, that may not quite be on this Trump train yet, that may be a little relieved by the fact that Haley is coming here tonight to speak. It's a good sign for the Republican Party to show unity, and especially after that assassination attempt on Saturday sparked so many calls to tamp down the rhetoric, to maybe come together a little bit more. And that is definitely what this signifies to me. Haley is going to be here. As you mentioned, she has a primetime slot. She's not pushed off to the wings or anything like that. They are really going to feature her prominently tonight. And it's also just a good move by the Republican Party, because there are so many Haley voters up for grabs that, again, may not be convinced on Donald Trump, maybe won't be convinced on JD Vance. But if they can show the Republicans that, bringing Haley here is something that's within their wheelhouse, they may be able to collect some of those voters. And, there was a lot of talk yesterday before that Vance pick was announced that maybe even Haley might be in the running still, and a big sign of unity that would have been, certainly. But bringing her here to speak tonight, I think, is exactly that. And I can't wait to hear people's reactions after her speech.
For that, Doug, and I do appreciate it. I did hear a little bit about what you're saying, because what I did is I just joined the live stream like everybody else, so I could hear what you were saying. And again, thanks for being a trooper as we work out.
Technology.
Also very interesting, and this is what Fox News is reporting at this point, so take that for what you will, but they do have connections within the Republican Party, needless to say. They're saying we might even see Melania Trump tonight. Anything that you're looking for? I mean, because look, we got surprises last night. No one expected Donald Trump to come out. Then we saw him come out with his bandaged ear, but it was a triumphant moment given what had happened, obviously with the attempted assassination, the attempt on his life. And then we also saw JD Vance and the two of them together. That obviously supercharged the convention. Do you expect more surprises tonight, or do you think this is going to go by script?
Hard to say. We certainly didn't see that Trump appearance coming last night. A really good strategic move by the Republican Party to get everybody kind of fired up that first night. Sorry, I was scrolling through my phone. I was pulling up some of the list of speakers that we're going to hear tonight, and there are some really big names on there. Rick Scott, who was at one time, a contender for the presidency himself, Elise Stefanik, who is in the conversation to be a vice presidential pick, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Vivek Ramaswamy, who also himself ran for president against Donald Trump at one point. And so there are going to be a lot of big names, and also a lot of people who maybe at one point didn't have the best relationship with Donald Trump that are going to be here on stage tonight, very likely singing his praises. And so what I want to hear, and I think this is really the undertone of everything that we're talking about here at this convention over the next couple of days, is everybody's tone. We've heard a lot since Saturday's assassination attempt about tamping down the rhetoric and about preaching unity. And so, I think I heard a lot of that last night. Certainly some of the more fiery speakers that you would have expected, including Georgia's Marjorie Taylor Greene, really did stick to that script of keeping things cool and making sure to stick to really what this convention is about, which is nominating Donald Trump for president. That happened yesterday. The VP pick came early. And so, from what I've heard from other folks who have covered conventions, fairly typical night. And so I think we can probably expect the same tonight, barring any surprises like we got last night as well. And so our goal today is to really kind of talk to some of the Georgia folks that are here. We want to talk to party members. We want to talk to delegates. And we want to see how they're feeling about some of the developments that have already occurred here on day one, and probably through the first half of day two as well.
One thing that comes to mind in all of this, and thanks for giving us the speaker list. I now can hear you a little delayed on the live stream, so I'm following along a little bit more with what you're saying. It's interesting when you do see that speakers list, but as you pointed out, we already do have a nominee for the Republican Party, no longer the presumptive nominee. Donald Trump is the nominee, and that is because they held a roll call vote and did this sort of, pro forma. And did it in advance. It's not like the old days. I've been covering so many conventions, and even when we already knew who the nominee was going to be, they went through the sort of, Texas, delegates cast all their ballots for Donald Trump or whatever. And so you have these sort of state delegations on the floor nominating, live. Is that going to happen as a matter of ceremony, or is really this more about sort of anointing the candidate and really turning this into a 4-day infomercial?
I would say a little bit of both. Like I said, some of the more fiery speakers, people you would expect to kind of ramp up that political rhetoric, really didn't do that last night. But again, some of the things that we heard yesterday certainly sounded like an infomercial for a Trump campaign. And especially, Brendan, after the Saturday assassination attempt, there was this real heavy focus on almost making Trump this deity. There were, Marjorie Taylor Greene had a line where she said, "I'm glad that God's hand was on his shoulder on Saturday." And so there has been certainly a big heightening of this buildup of Trump as a figure in the Republican Party. And so I guarantee you're going to hear certainly more of that tonight. And one other thing I want to note too, I know we're at the Republican National Convention. That roll call was taken yesterday. It was out of the way day one. And now there's talk on the Democratic side about also holding a virtual roll call before the DNC, which is now just a couple of weeks away. And the reason for that is because there are certain states that have to have their ballots set and know who the candidate is at this point before the Democratic National Convention starts. And so with all this talk about Joe Biden potentially being replaced as the nominee, the Democrats are really getting ahead of this and potentially holding a virtual roll call to do exactly what the Republicans did here last night and nominate Joe Biden for president before they get to the convention, so he is not left off the ballot in some states if there's still a little confusion over who's going to be the nominee in the Democratic Party. We are kind of covering this with the context of knowing that that is the undertone of the DNC coming up in a couple weeks, that there's still a lot of messy stuff going on there with Biden and potentially him being replaced as nominee. I don't think that will happen, but it's just so interesting to see how there are parallels between this RNC and this DNC, and looking at how each party is kind of approaching the next couple of weeks, which are so crucial in this election cycle. And getting back to what you said before about this opportunity for people to message here for Donald Trump, these conventions are largely ceremonial now because we decide all this in primaries and caucuses. And so, that is really the point, as you well know, is to just get the messaging out there, get a good soundbite, get some good speakers up there who can maybe make their mark on the party for any potential future runs for higher office. And so I think that really is still what's going on here today. Even with all the excitement with the surprise visit yesterday, the early VP pick, it was really sort of still a rah-rah moment for the Republican Party. And I really suspect that that's what it's going to be a lot of today, especially with the lineup of speakers that we have. A lot of high-profile names, a lot of people who are very close in Trump's orbit. And so, you can expect that same energy today here on day two.
You make such a good point, especially about the Democrats probably having this roll call vote. They were talking about that even before the debate performance from Joe Biden, which by all accounts was, disastrous, certainly for the president's hopes for re-election, but also for the possibility that he even stays at the top of the ticket. And they were talking about that roll call vote in advance for the Democrats before the convention, because their convention is after states like Ohio require you be on the ballot. They did pass a measure in Ohio to sort of waive that and to move that date, but they were still talking about that in advance. It sounds as though that those calls are even louder now after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, because the news cycle was completely dominated by watching every single word coming out of Joe Biden's mouth and sort of, reading the tea leaves on is he cognitively able to do the job today and for another 4 years. And now the news cycle has shifted to what happened on Saturday, the assassination attempt on the former president. I mean, I have to go all the way back to my childhood when Ronald Reagan was shot outside the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. And, he went on to re-election. He was a young new president. He wasn't young, but he was a young administration, I should say, because it was early in his first administration. And then he gets shot, and it sort of changed the perspective of the way people saw him. I don't think not dissimilar to what happened with 9/11 with George W. Bush. I had traveled with the George W. Bush campaign when he was governor running for president, and he was a squeaker. Obviously, Al Gore won the popular vote, and then the Supreme Court ended up deciding the election, essentially. So he wasn't the most popular first-term president, but he was reelected. So we have a very different situation here with Donald Trump because, this would be his second term if he's elected president, but it's not a consecutive term. And it's important to point out because there's a lot of talk online about now Donald Trump gets 2 more potential terms because the Constitution or the current regulations are 2 consecutive terms. But this would basically be his second and last term if he's reelected. What I want to ask you about all of this is, I know that you're working really hard around the clock, but what is the mood there in the convention hall? Are people talking more about JD Vance? Are they talking more? I remember just walking around the halls of the arena. You run into real delegates, wearing all of the flair and the swag. What are they talking about? Are they talking about what happened on Saturday? Are they talking about the documents case getting dismissed? Are they talking about, JD Vance?
Right. I think that Vance certainly dominated the conversation yesterday. Anything that, was heard on the floor was really about him and that pick. Because, again, it came so early. I think a lot of people were expecting it, but not to come as early as it did. So that kind of dominated the discussion yesterday. I'd say very closely second, followed by what happened on Saturday. People were really not talking about the documents case. And I think that's because there's already this sentiment here among Republicans that a lot of these cases, all of these cases, in some people's minds, were really not anything they needed to worry about because they didn't believe they should have happened in the first place. And so I think there was a little bit of a ho-hum attitude about the case being dropped. People, were not on board with the charges in the first place. It was really angering a lot of Republicans. And so that was not actually anything that we heard a whole lot of conversation about here yesterday. But certainly that Vance pick is what really grabbed headlines here on the floor. Certainly when we were talking to delegates, certainly I wanted to know what they thought about that pick because there were so many potential names floating around out there, up to and including minutes before Vance was announced as the VP pick. And there are so many things that people like about him too. Obviously, Ohio in the Midwest, there's that big blue wall that's so hard to crack, although it has certainly in recent years. But this all but shores up Ohio for former President Trump. Certainly it was a good move to pick somebody from the Midwest because you have people from Ohio spread out all over the place among those states. And so I think that getting somebody from that very crucial region, which is what you try to do with a vice presidential pick in the first place, was a pretty smart move. And, consider the fact that age has been such a factor in this race. It's something that everybody has talked about. We go back and forth with people all the time about having term limits for presidents. That's something that has come up a lot recently as we've discussed the ages of these two candidates. Either one of them would be the oldest president to leave office, whoever is elected. And so, picking somebody who's under 40 years old, the first millennial on a presidential ticket, I think was also a very smart move. And people here know that because it kind of dilutes the conversation about Trump's age and about what could happen, if the worst, like Saturday, were to take place. Having someone who's young, having somebody who's vibrant, who can really foil Joe Biden on that age conversation was a really good move by the Trump campaign. And that was something that people here recognized very heavily yesterday. He's also a veteran. I mean, Trump has had a lot of problems with the armed forces, talking, whether or not the details around it are factual. There was that suckers and losers comment when he was over in Europe for a commemoration that got a lot of focus at the debate. And it's really dominated his the conversation around Trump and the military. Of course, he never served. That's something that, doesn't sit well with a lot of people who are veterans or military folks. And so picking someone who was a Marine, a longtime Marine, it was also something that a lot of people down here on the floor were very happy about. We spoke to, for example, Congressman Rich McCormick from Georgia, who himself served for over a decade as a Marine as well. And he was like, this is really good to have somebody who understands the military, who has been in the military, to be, giving this advice to Trump. And so I think that Vance certainly dominated the conversation yesterday. They brought him out here. He sat right next to Trump when he made his surprise visit to the floor. And so that was really what was on everybody's minds. I think that's what's going to be on everybody's mind today as well, because we are still looking ahead to Vance's speech here on the floor on Wednesday night. Now, we thought maybe that was when the pick might actually come and it would just go right into that address. But he is ready to go. He's already gotten the requisite votes to become the vice presidential candidate on that ticket with Trump. And so full steam ahead for JD Vance. And I think certainly if I can answer a question before we do this on Wednesday, what I'm most looking forward to on Wednesday is going to be that address from Vance and what kind of tone he brings to it. Keep in mind, he was not a Trump guy. He at one point called him America's Hitler. He said people who voted for him were idiots. And so I think that this is a big turnaround for him. Of course, Trump was a massive fan of his when he was running for Senate in Ohio back in, I believe, 2021. And so this is a big turnaround for JD Vance, who at one point was not really on that MAGA train and is now the vice presidential candidate on the ticket with Trump.
Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First political reporter, on top of his game there. We know you're working around the clock, but man, you know your stuff, and it's so great to have you live in Milwaukee, and thanks for joining us. I know you have a lot of work left to do. We'll see you all the way through the 11 o'clock tonight on Atlanta News First. Doug Reardon, thank you. And it's important to point out, Doug was just talking about the sort of second names on the ticket, the running mates, and JD Vance yesterday, we found out essentially right about now, or a little bit of the afternoon, we found out that JD Vance was going to be the running mate for Donald Trump, that he was his vice presidential pick. And sorry about that, just killed that audio a little bit, a little loud there, sorry. So JD Vance, what's interesting about what happened yesterday is right here on this live stream, I'm not going to say we predicted it was going to be JD Vance, and it would have been a safe bet. I mean, even the odds makers in Las Vegas were, had JD Vance at the top of the ticket, or at least at the top of the odds, as the second man on the ticket. But we did on this live stream give some empirical evidence that strongly suggested JD Vance was the choice. You may remember, if you were watching yesterday, that I pointed out sitting here that for Suburbans with U.S. government plates had pulled up to J.D. Vance's house as he was playing catch in the backyard with the kids. And the neighbors noticed that, and it kind of filtered up to those of us in the press. It certainly was making the rounds of social media that, they just gave him a protection detail, especially what had happened on Saturday. This was Sunday, so it was a little more than 24 hours after the assassination attempt on the former president. Suddenly, there's a huge security presence at J.D. Vance's house. Now, that could have been the case at the other potential vice presidential running mates' houses as well. And Vance's own office actually sort of said, oh, no, that's just my congressional security detail. I can tell you that senators have a security detail from the Capitol Police, but it's not 4 Suburbans with a bunch of agents jumping out. So that was very strong empirical evidence. We reported it. We don't report what we think we know. Certainly as investigative reporters, we don't. We report what we actually know. And what we knew was that there had been a huge increase in his security detail on Sunday night, which was a strong suggestion. We merely reported that to you, and it turned out to be probative and turned out to be true that J.D. Vance is indeed the running mate for Donald Trump. So when is J.D. Vance going to speak? J.D. Vance is going to speak tomorrow night, Wednesday night. This is pretty standard that you have the actual nominee for President of the United States speaks on the last night of the convention. That's Thursday this week. And then the night before that, the vice presidential pick speaks. So those are going to be the two headlines for Wednesday and Thursday. And then, of course, after Donald Trump accepts the nomination officially with his speech, the balloon drop, and that's the end of the convention. We're going to be doing this live stream every day at 11 o'clock, including Friday, where we'll do a wrap-up the entire GOP convention. And we're also going to do the same thing for the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in August. So, don't worry that we're not going to have both sides. We'll obviously cover both of the conventions. So a lot happened last night. You just heard from Doug Reardon, sort of a look ahead of what to expect for today. But it's important to see where we've already been. It was a huge day at the convention yesterday with that surprise visit from Donald Trump on the floor and shaking hands with and appearing with his running mate, his appointed running mate, J.D. Vance, for the first time as a ticket, basically. But now let's hear from Doug Reardon with a wrap-up of day one of the Republican National Convention.
One of the convention wrapped up here with a few surprises. First, former President Donald Trump made an appearance here with a bandaged ear on the floor, his first appearance publicly since that attempt on his life this weekend in Butler, Pennsylvania. Also, Senator J.D. Vance from Ohio was announced as his running mate 48 hours before he was supposed to be taking the stage here in Milwaukee to actually accept that formally. Delegates were really pleased and seemed to be with this pick. They told me they were actually hoping for it, some of them. Vance is a Marine veteran. He comes from humble beginnings but graduated from Yale. He authored a best-selling book. He's just 39 years old. He is the first millennial on a presidential ticket, and that's youth in an election year where age is a big factor.
All right, so that was Doug Reardon reporting from Milwaukee with what happened overnight. And we're going to continue this live stream tomorrow at 11 a.m. You can watch us on YouTube. You can watch us on AtlantaNewsFirst.com and Atlanta News First Plus, wherever you have your apps there, like Roku, or even your phone. That's actually where I was watching the live feed, right here on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, Atlanta News First. So we encourage you to do the same. Tomorrow we're going to have a lot more coverage. Tomorrow joining us, we will have Tim Darnell, our investigative digital journalist. We'll also have Joy Lim Nakrin joining us, who is a fantastic attorney, and you see her here regularly on the Atlanta News First Plus streams. And we're going to be covering this convention from beginning to end, from gavel to gavel, with a big wrap-up on Friday at 11. In the meantime, you can get all your information at AtlantaNewsFirst.com. You can several articles up. We've got politics covered right here at Atlanta News First, so be sure to do that. And then, of course, we're on from 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 10 o'clock. We're all over the map, and then finishing up the night at 11. And one more push, which is for our Atlanta News First morning show. You can start watching us at 4:30 a.m. I'm Brendan Keefe, Chief Investigator for Atlanta News First Investigates. We'll see you next time.